All right, everyone. So in this video, I want to talk to you guys about a place called Africa. Now, what is my opinion about this place? Well, Africa sucks, okay? I'm basically saying what everyone else already knows and what everyone else already thinks. Africa sucks. People in Africa know that Africa sucks. And please spare me this talk about how, oh, Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Yeah, we all know that. But that does not change the fact that the continent itself sucks, okay? The continent of Africa sucks. I did a video earlier about why India sucks. Now I'm doing a video on why Africa sucks. And who knows, maybe one day I'll do a video on why Europe sucks. Maybe when another war breaks out in that continent. So I did a little bit of research today on Africa. I know, like, why are you doing research on this place? We all know it sucks. What's the point of doing research? Well, I want to, get my stats together. Want to get my stats arranged and get some, concrete facts and information about Africa before I explain why this place is a total shithole. So, here we go. So for one thing, the GDP of Africa. I don't want to get into the GDP of one African country or a handful of African countries because there are dozens of countries in Africa. So I don't want to get into like the GDP of Uganda. We're not going to get into that. Let's get into the GDP of the whole of Africa. What does this continent make as far as GDP goes? What does this continent collectively make together? Because if Africa is so great, and with all of the resources that Africa has, this place should be kicking everybody's ass. Africa should be defeating Europe. It should be defeating North America, South America. It should be kicking China's ass. It should be kicking everybody's ass. The Middle East should be on its knees, okay, in the presence of the powerful African warlords. So let's get right into this. So the GDP of Africa is over 2 trillion. That's it. Over 2 trillion. That's the GDP of Africa. This entire continent, this ginormous continent, it's gigantic, this place, with all of its oil, diamonds, all sorts of, with all the resources that this continent has, it produces just a little bit over 2 trillion. Now, I thought, okay, let's do some comparisons here. So the nation of Mexico has a population of 127 million people. Over 1 billion people live in Africa. All right, 1 billion people live in Africa, over that. So it's comparable to the populations of China and India. So a little bit over 1 billion people live in Africa, and the GDP of Africa is over 2 trillion. 127 people live in Mexico. What's the GDP of Mexico? 1.3 trillion. So Mexico, with 127 million people, is already making roughly half of what Africa makes in GDP. Mexico is kicking Africa's ass. Okay, Mexico, the country that people are trying to escape from. People are traveling hundreds of miles to get out of Mexico, to cross the border into Texas, California, to get the hell out of Mexico. Mexico is kicking Africa's ass. Okay? Do not say that about Africa. Africa is a very good country. Mexico is an inferior country to Africa. Africa is the motherland of all of humanity. And they used to teach me that crap when I was in high school. They used to say, oh, Africa is the birthplace of all civilization. It's where all civilization began. All human civilization began in Africa. And I'm like, how? I don't believe that. Oh, well, man, because the pyramids was built by Africans, man. The pyramid, yeah. I could believe that Africans built the pyramids, right? African slaves built the pyramids. I could believe that. But the people who were running the empire of Egypt were not black. That's just a fact. They weren't. The pharaohs was not black. We was not kings. That's all a lie that you made up in your head. It's a fantasy that you made up in your head so that you can have something to be proud about. The reality is that the elites of Egypt, the pharaonic elites who ruled Egypt, were genetically related to Semites and Indo-Europeans. I mean, there was more the elites ruling Egypt were genetically related to people of Semitic makeup and also more so European makeup as well. But they weren't they weren't King Ungugu ruling over Africa and his royal entourage of hunters from Kenya. Like that wasn't happening. Anyway, moving on to more stats here. So Brazil, one of the biggest hellholes in the planet. Brazil, a very violent country with over 200 murdered people per 100,000. That's the murder rate of Brazil. Brazil kicks Africa's ass. The GDP of Brazil is 1.8 trillion. 1.8 trillion. It's roughly half of the GDP of the entire continent of Africa. And the population of Brazil is 211 people. Doesn't even have anything close to the population of Africa, still kicking Africa's ass. And people want to leave Brazil, by the way. I know, because I've met numerous Brazilian immigrants, and they tell me they have no interest in going back to Brazil. They don't want to go back to Brazil. I come from Rio de Janeiro. I come from Sao Paulo. I don't want to go back. No, I want to stay here in America, teach jiu-jitsu. They don't want to go to Brazil. But Brazil is still kicking Africa's ass. And by the way, in all fairness, I would choose Brazil over Africa any day. Texas is not a country, so to speak, but in a way it is. It's a state of the United States. But in a way, it's like a country in the sense that it has this super powerful economy. And Texas is a state that doesn't really need America too much as far as resources goes, I think. I mean, well, I'm not entirely sure about that. But Texas has oil. Texas has a very powerful economy. Texas is a powerhouse state of America. And Texas, this one state of America, kicks Africa's ass. Okay? The GDP of Texas is 1.9 trillion. They're kicking Africa's ass. Texas is kicking Africa's ass. New York is kicking Africa's ass. They're not even countries. These are states. I mean, they're kind of like countries, but nonetheless, these are states under Washington, okay, under the empire of Washington. And they're still kicking Africa's ass just by themselves. Like Texas by itself is kicking Africa's ass. So Africa just sucks so hard, okay? Now, India sucks hard, but Africa sucks hard even more, okay? Africa sucks harder. Africa is a terrible place. It really is a terrible place. The majority of poverty, starvation, is in Africa. Africa is the only country in the world that did not see a decrease in political violence in 2020. The majority of children who are starving, living in horrendous poverty, are in Africa. It's just it's a shitty place. It's a I hate talking this way because it sounds like I'm attacking my fellow man. But it's like the more I read it, because I've been reading about Africa for years. I read about, what was going on in the Central African Republic. I read a little bit about the South Sudanese Civil War. I read about what North Sudan was doing to Christian people. I read about the Democratic Republic of Congo. They should get rid of the word democratic. But I read about that, how they were killing Christians in that place. They were attacking Catholics. Like it's just a shitty place. Like no human being should live like this. No one should live like this. And it's like there's nonstop violence going on in this place. They can't stop killing each other. North Mali, for example, look up North Mali and all the horrendous violence that's been going on there for years. I mean, for years, this violence has been going on nonstop. You have, what do you call them? Tuareg people, and they want to fight against the government. And then you have the Muslim fundamentalists, and they want to fight against everybody else. And then you have the Arab nationalists, basically Afro-Arab nationalists, who are pan-Arabs, and they want to fight against everybody else as well. And it's just crap. Now, you could say, well, Tay, things like this happened in Europe, and they did happen in Europe. But you know what? Europe has been very, very peaceful for over 75 years. Over 75 plus years, Europe has been very, very peaceful, except for the Balkans. The difference, I would say, is that Europe will go through these great moments of peace and prosperity. Yes, and Europe will have wars, but they stop. They stop eventually. It's like in Africa, it doesn't end. And also, Europe has this capacity for civilization. A functional economy. You have lots of industry and production. The same goes for North and South America. In Africa, it's like everything sucks there. Everything sucks. That's why you have so many migrants from Africa. So I want to give you guys some more stats about Africa, why this place sucks. So this is from a website called Children International. And it says here, Sub-Saharan Africa has both the highest rates of children living in extreme poverty at just under 50%, and the largest share of the world's extremely poor children at just over 50%. According to a World Bank and UNICEF study, of all the children living in extreme poverty, 75% live in Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. So the majority of the world's poorest children, they live in Africa. In 2012, 3.5 million children in Africa were two-parent orphans, meaning that they had lost both their mother and their father. And another 28.6 million children were single-parent orphans, bringing the total number of orphans to 32.1 million. So they are over 32 million orphans living in Africa. That's an entire country. That's like a whole state of America, almost an entire state of America, just orphans. Like, oh, this country has a population of 32 million people. It's all orphans, everybody. So a whole nation of orphans live within Africa. Of the 10 most unequal countries in the world today, 7 are in Africa. Nothing to be proud about here. From development, so this is here's another set of stats here. This is from Development Aid. It says here in 2021, there are 490 million people in Africa living in extreme poverty. 490 million. That's insane. That's like almost the whole population of the European Union. Or 36% of the total population. This number is up from 481 million in 2019. So it hasn't gone down. And that's the thing. You don't see progress in Africa. There's no progress there. It's not like, we're getting things. Yeah, we went through some shit. We were under European colonialism, but we are progressing. We're getting better. You don't see that in Africa. And that's the thing. That's the thing I want to mention here. Here's something I want to mention here, everybody. Poland. Okay, I am currently reading a book. It's called Poland's Genocide. So far, it's a great book. It's about the genocide of the Polish people under the Third Reich, the Nazis, and the communists. And it talks about violence that was perpetrated against the Polish people by Ukrainian nationalists as well. And it talks about the horrors that were perpetrated by the communist regime, the Soviet Union, and the Nazi regime, and how millions of Polish people were butchered by both regimes. Poland went through absolute horror. Out of all of the countries that suffered under the Soviet Union and the Third Reich, Poland suffered the most. Millions of Poles butchered. Most of them were killed by the Nazis, by the way, because the Nazis had this idea that the Polish race was inferior, and they talked about exterminating the whole Polish race because they were of inferior blood. Poland today is one of the biggest economies in the world. You can go to Poland right now and have a good time. You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to see people starving to death. You're going to see people getting fattened up by pierogies and drinking beer. Poland today is a clean country. I'm going to assume that it doesn't really have a very high murder rate. I've never heard of Poland having a super high murder rate. I've heard that it's very safe, and people have a very good time when they visit Poland. Poland is one of the biggest economies in the world, yet Poland suffered more than any other country under the reign of terror of the Soviet Union and the Third Reich. And when people talk about Africa and why Africa sucks, what do they always say? Oh, because of European imperialism. That's the reason why, because of European imperialism. There's no excuse. Because the Europeans came and they destroyed everything. They destroyed all of Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria. They destroyed it all. That's not an excuse. That's bullshit. Poland suffered horrendously. Millions of Poles, absolute genocide committed, systematic genocide committed on the Polish people. That did not stop the Polish people from prospering. That's the thing. In Europe can have wars and atrocities and genocides and all of these things, just like Africa does. But Europe will progress. That's the difference. Even the Middle East. People talk about the Middle East being such a terrible place. The Middle East progresses. Syria, before the Civil War happened, Syria had malls, internet access. We have those things in Africa too. What are you talking about? Yeah, but in Syria, they didn't have all the craziness that you see in Africa. Even the West Bank, as wild as the West Bank is, the murder rate of the West Bank is extremely low. I've talked about this several times, but the murder rate in the West Bank is much lower than the United States at 0.5 per 100,000. A very low murder rate because Palestinians are not really violent people. The Middle East is nowhere near as bad as Africa. As crazy as that sounds, it's the truth. The Middle East is nowhere near as bad as Africa. I knew a guy. He did like missionary work, and he went to Uganda, Madagascar, and he was in the army, and he married a woman from Iraq, and she was a Shia Muslim. And he told me when I was in Madagascar with my Iraqi wife in 2015, he told me she was begging me. She says, if we're gonna be here stuck in Madagascar, send me back to Iraq where I can live with my parents. She says, because I can't live in this shithole. And that was when ISIS was running around. She would rather go to Iraq, where ISIS was, than stay another day in Madagascar. That's how much of a shithole Africa is. Because nobody's starving in the Middle East. I mean, unless you're like really locked in that war-torn area within Syria, but really, I mean, like it's nowhere near. It doesn't even come close to what you see in Africa today. Of course, you will have starvation in little pockets here and there within places like Syria, but that's because of war. And when you have war, you're going to have starvation. But in Africa, it's like it's endemic within the continent. And even as bad as the Middle East may be, it's nowhere near as bad as Africa. The political violence in Africa has not gone down. It's the only place in the world where political violence did not go down in 2020. And that's the thing. You have these African politicians who are like, we are doing reforms. We are doing reforms. We are doing reforms. I remember I saw this interview. It was in DW. It was between Tim Sebastian and some politician from Somalia. And Tim Sebastian was like, so Somalia for years was the number one worst country in the world. Now you are number two most worst country in the world. How does it feel to be up there? Just to no longer be number one worst country in the world. And the Somalian guy was like, we are doing reforms. We are progressing. We are progressing. It's like, it doesn't progress. That's the thing. You can go to the West Bank right now and you'll be fine. You can go to the West Bank right now and you won't starve. In Africa, it's not like in other countries. You go to America, Italy, you can sit down at a restaurant, you can feed yourself. In Africa, it's like, I remember I talked to this guy who was in Africa for a while, and he told me, he says, it's not like you can just go to a restaurant all the time. Like for miles and miles within your area, there are no restaurants. You starve. It's it's not like a place that you can sit around comfortably. Yeah, you can find these little tourist areas, but it looks so fake. And once you get out of that little zone, it's like, and you look at a lot of the food that they give you in restaurants there. And I see it on YouTube. It's like, do you really want to eat that? Getting more elaborate on the facts of how shitty Africa is. This is more from development aid. In South Africa, the continent's second largest economy, 16 million people live in extreme poverty, 26% of the population. 26% of South Africa's population lives in extreme poverty. And we keep hearing about South Africa, a booming economy. It's a shithole. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, currently has a 46% poverty rate with 90 million of its 210 million strong population living in extreme poverty. So out of 210 million people, 90 million people live in extreme poverty. Burundi, often regarded as the world's poorest country. That's the thing. People talk about the Middle East. The poorest country in the world is in Africa, not the Middle East. Burundi, often regarded as the world's poorest country, has the highest poverty rate in Africa at 80%. It is closely followed by the Central African Republic, 79%, Madagascar, 78%, the Republic of the Congo, 75%, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 74%. Now, here is some comedy gold for you guys. This is from Relief Web. It says here, for the African Union, 2020 is supposed to be a landmark year. So the African Union had this idea that by 2020, there'll be no more war, no more genocide, no more of that. So it says here, its Silencing the Guns initiative is aimed at ending all wars, civil conflicts, gender-based violence, violent conflict, and preventing genocide in the continent by 2020. While no one can argue with that laudable goal, the continental body and its member states will have to work miracles to achieve it by the end of this year, especially when the trend seems to be heading in the other direction. So violence has not gone anywhere, and Africa has always been this way. Africa has always had difficulty with things like this. You can go back to ancient times, and you'll find all sorts of weirdities and brutalities. For example, there was a book that I read years ago. It was called Osiris, and it was written by an archaeologist by the name of E.A. Wallace Budge. Just think of the video game company, E.A. Wallace Budge. He wrote a book about the worship of Osiris in ancient Egypt and how it originated from sub-Saharan African religion. And he talks about how African chiefs and kings would murder people in mass if the father of the chief died or if the chief died. So the chief died and 1,000 people had to be killed. 200 people had to be killed. And there's one case that I have here. I got it from the book. When the mother of Tutu Kwamina died in 1816, 3,000 slaves and Fanti prisoners were put to death. So this kind of brutality has always been there in Africa. It's always been there. I'm not saying it only exists, and obviously not. But the point is that Africa does not progress from it. People go to war. People have genocide. It happens all over the place. But people should progress, and Africa does not progress. The problem with Africa is not the continent. It's Africans. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.